All right, we're here with our favorite Mansell, Kaylee Mansell from DawgNation. What's up, Kaylee? First time on the show. Thank you so much.
No, thank you guys so much. I just came over here to say hello yesterday, and you talked about me coming on SEC podcast, and I was like, me? Is there somebody behind me? Okay, so this means everything to me.
Yeah, I think our very first media days, yeah, it must have been. We interviewed Rusty, and I think it was the next day you came over and said, my dad said, if there's one person we got to meet, it's Cousin Shane here at SEC Media Days. That's when we knew we belonged here.
Yeah, I actually was with the LA Chargers at the time when you guys talked to him. I got off the flight, didn't sleep, came straight to SEC Media Days, and my dad's not the kind of person that wastes words. He's not going to say something just to say something, and he talked about his experience with you guys, and so I knew I had to come find y'all immediately.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, because I think I saw a beach picture with is that where he's at? Like he just said, why does he hate Texas so bad?
I'm kind of glad that he's not here because I get to have this experience by myself and be away from him. But to tell you the truth, I think I'm having a better time than him right now.
Yeah, well, I can't believe he's not here.
Well, I'll tell you, we had Kirby here yesterday, and I would say out of all the coaches, that's the one people talked about the most, so coming from the Chargers, now following the Georgia Bulldogs, I know I've said this to a couple of folks, and it drives me nuts because I know Kirby is probably the most competitive person that's walked through here since Nick Saban, and I know there's a little bit in the back of them saying, shit, we were so close, we really screwed up. We should have been in there because if we would have made the playoffs, we would have won this thing. What is the locker room temperature these days with the Bulldogs coming into this season? Are they just seek and destroy this year? Are we going to see multi-score games just because that's what Georgia can do?
Well, I think the culture in the locker room starts at the top, right? When you've got Kirby Smart leading your program, of course that's going to have some influence over your locker room. And we can talk about last year, should have, could have, would have, but that unfinished business that they left with, that's going to be the motivation going into this year. And you talk about Kirby being the talk of the room. I mean, for the most part, it's really been about Texas and Oklahoma, and I actually think that Kirby's going to use that to his advantage too. Like, they're not talking about you guys. Y'all aren't important anymore. It's all about Texas and Oklahoma, and because Kirby's so good at taking an inch and making it into a mile. So I know he's going back to Athens telling them that they don't care about y'all anymore.
So can we get it sounds like you're guaranteeing Georgia's going to win a national championship. Can we get that on record?
I try to take things day by day. I mean, in my mind, there's no way that they don't make the playoffs, but I do think that this year, with the 12-team playoff, it's more wide open than it's ever been before. All it takes is one game. If you're not bringing your best every single game, there's no telling what's going to happen. So I do think that Georgia is the top national championship contender, and I think we're going to find a lot about the Dogs in game one when they play Clemson.
How realistic, though? I know I was just kidding before, but realistically, how many more titles do you think Kirby can win in Athens, provided he's there 10 or more years,
Every single year that Kirby Smart is at Georgia, Georgia's obviously going to be a topic of conversation as a national championship contender. Now, it all goes back to recruiting. You got to be able to recruit at the high school level, and that's what Kirby's managed to do so well. So I think as long as Kirby Smart remains the head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs, they're always going to be in that conversation. My guess says that he wins, if he's there another 10 years, I'm going to say 5 or 6. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. I like
There's
the
a clip right there.
And that's the show. Rusty warned you about this, right?
You got what you wanted?
No. We are curious, though, because the schedule is very, very daunting. It's not like they're going to steamroll all these guys. In fact, they asked Kirby multiple times about some of these opponents they're facing. But September 28th, Alabama, getting them early, week 4. How big is that game for Kirby and company?
Well, I think Georgia's coming into it with an advantage because they'll have already played an SEC matchup at that point with Kentucky. This is Alabama's first SEC matchup. For Kaylee DeBoer, like, that's a nightmare, right? You don't want to face Georgia in game 1 because you don't really know what your team is made up at that point. But going into Tuscaloosa, it being at Alabama, it's not that it brings a doubt to my mind, but it definitely changes the stakes of the game a lot. But even just in talking about this, it's crazy how the conversation around the Georgia-Alabama rivalry has changed because that would be the game that you would circle on the calendar, but now it's the Texas game. But I'm glad that you bring up scheduling, because one thing that we've been talking about all week is on an opponent schedule, Georgia is the toughest opponent. So nobody's talking about how tough Georgia's schedule is. They go on the road at Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Texas, and you open up with Clemson. So nobody's talking about the strength of Georgia's schedule, but you can't lose that game to Alabama right there, because that changes the narrative of not just Georgia, but the entire Southeastern Conference.
Yeah. Well, I know you guys at DawgNation are so plugged in with the fans. How many fans are you hearing from that want to go to make that trip to Austin?
I mean, I think everyone, the demand for that game is so high, and everyone knows that it's going to be so difficult to get there, because not only is Formula One that weekend, but the Major League Soccer team in Austin is hosting a massive game. So I think the fact that fans know that tickets and space are going to be limited is only making the demand for that game grow, because this might be the biggest road game that Georgia has played in the last decade.
Well, we've talked to some Texas people. They're thinking about Airbnb in their homes, so we'll hook you up if you need it.
That's what I was talking to some guys down the road, and I was saying that people in Georgia do that for the Masters. Like, all of Augusta gets out of town, rents their houses out, and the guy down the road at ESPN Austin, their radio station, was like, I'm really, really considering it. And you know what? Hey, go get your bag. Do what you got to do.
You know, for a long time, the running joke was, you haven't won it since 1980. I would imagine you're glad you don't have to hear that anymore. But I want to ask you, one thing you haven't done since 1982 is have a Heisman. So is this the year that, I mean, I will say, Beck, I'm not saying that he's going to be the guy, but he sure did dress the part yesterday as a Heisman winner. Is he the next Heisman for the Georgia Bulldogs?
So I want to get back to the first thing that you said. Somebody wrote me a Valentine's Day card 3 or 4 years ago, one of my good friends in college, and it said, roses are red, violets are blue, UGA hasn't won a national championship since 1980. I still have it. I held on to it, and of course when Georgia won it, the first thing I did, I was like, oop, I got the receipts, send right now. Carson Beck being the Heisman favorite, it's just beyond me, because even midway through the season, I don't think that Georgia really rallied behind and had that sort of confidence in Carson Beck until the Florida game. Because even after the Auburn game, I mean, that was a nightmare, right? If it weren't for Brock Bowers, we might not win that game. They're like, let's get Brock Vandagriff in here. To see how much progression that he made in the second half of the season was exponential, right? And the fact that we're even talking about a Heisman Trophy candidate in Georgia in the same sentence is crazy, because even though Stetson Bennett was a Heisman contender, Georgia's not known for strong offenses, defensive-minded. You think about those two national championship teams, it's all about the defense, not about the offense. I think that Carson Beck's got the potential to do it. I don't know if you guys are like Game of Thrones, House of Dragon realm, but there's that saying in House of the Dragon that the only thing that can tear down the House of the Dragon is the House of the Dragon itself. So when I think about Carson Beck, the only person that can stop him from winning that Heisman is him.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, I mean, you kind of went there, so I had to ask. You know, all the driving issues.
Yeah.
That's the thing. To your point, I mean, I think the only thing that could stop Georgia is itself, and not that that has stopped them, but it could if they need to really curb that.
No, I mean, you have to bring it up, right? If it happens one time, okay, you can blame it on the fact that they're young kids with lots of money and fast cars, but when it continues to happen over and over, certainly it's a culture problem, and maybe the punishment isn't scary enough. I mean, we heard the news 10 minutes before Kirby went to the podium yesterday that they had released one of our senior secondary players because of violating team rules, and we didn't get all the details, of course, but we knew that it had to do with a driving related incident, and now they're imposing fines on the players through the Classic City Collective for those that do disobey the rules. So I think in light of the recent events, they have stepped up that punishment, and I hope that stops it, but obviously you gotta lead by example. So for those older guys, like Smile Munden was arrested earlier this year, he's supposed to be a leader on this team. If the younger guys don't see the veterans respecting the rules, I mean, why would you expect them to? So hopefully with the new fines in place and potentially a scapegoat or somebody had to be the sacrifice, right? Maybe we'll see that slow down, and with the football season, the focus being shifted elsewhere, I hope it fixes the problem. Because I'm tired of talking about it. I'm glad to talk about it with you guys.
I thought this was the first time we brought it up. So it is, you know, obviously that's outside of Athens. That's what a lot of people are pointing at is And it's hard because, I was telling somebody earlier, I've got kids, and trying to convince them to do what they need to do is easier said than, Rusty's probably saying the same thing, like I have told, how many times has he told you to slow down, so. But
I was the golden child, remember? He put the fear of God in me early on, so I was afraid to break the rules.
But I want to kind of pivot off that, back to back in the quarterback and the wide receiver. I want to talk about the wide receiver room because you guys are, for the longest time, we had some dudes. We talk about Bowers. We talk about McConkey. That was the face of the receiving room. What is it going to look like at the end of this season? Are we going to look back and say, hey, these two are the next two to play in the NFL?
I think you bring up a really great point. I think that's one of the biggest questions regarding this team and their identity in general is with Bowers and McConkey gone, who becomes the go-to guy? You look at the wide receiver position. On paper, there's not somebody that you say, wow, they're elite. They're really great. There's just a bunch of really good guys. We brought in Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas from the transfer portal last year, but neither of them had the season I think one of us was hoping for them to at least have. But then this year they also get Colby Young from Miami, who there's been a lot of talk about him in the offseason. My prediction for me, I think that Dylan Bell becomes the guy for Carson Beck just because he's been with Georgia from the very beginning. We saw what he did in the Tennessee game and even in Florida State. I think that he becomes the sense of comfortability for Carson Beck, just knowing that he's going to be open in the end zone because he makes crazy touchdown passes. But I also do want to mention that our running game last year, it wasn't nearly as strong as it's been in the past. You think of Georgia, Herschel Walker, RBU, but we really haven't seen that. And I'm hoping that having Trevor Etienne will bring that dynamic back. So even if there's not somebody downfield, he's got somebody behind him that he knows can carry the ball a long way.
That was my dark horse for a Heisman.
Yeah.
I because again, and I've said this on 50 shows today or this week, is Georgia and running back go hand in hand, and it feels like we've not had it in a little while, and I think Etienne could possibly be that guy that is just a game changer.
I think so too. For a while, I think we thought it was going to be Zamir White because he averaged like 14.4 yards per carry in high school. Right. And then he spent so much time injured. And I think that was the last running back that everyone was like, oh, he's going to be that guy, right? DeAndre Swift saw a lot of success, but then you have the level of expectation just set so high from what we saw Nick Chubb and Sony Michel do. And I'm really hoping that that can be brought back this year with Trevor Etienne and potentially Roderick Robinson.
Yeah. You think Kirby will ever lose to Florida again?
No. No, I've got no doubt about that in my mind. It's not going to happen. I actually don't even think that Billy Napier will be the head coach of the Florida Gators when Georgia and Florida face off this year.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, I did tell Paul, I said, say goodbye to Billy because this will be his last media days. They got mad at me when I said that.
I mean, talk about coaches in the hot seat.
Yeah.
That one right there. I didn't get to see him in his time up there, but I don't often feel bad for people, especially coaches in the SEC, but I was like, he knows exactly what he's getting himself into today, and it's up to him to change the narrative around this Florida program. But I don't see it happening. You can't blame it on Dan Mullen's recruiting anymore.
Well, you fit in. You would fit in on that SEC podcast. Well, that being said, I mean, what is the timeline on a coach these days? It's not like the 80s when you could sign them up for 4 or 5 years, let them build through recruiting, What is that level of expectations, in your opinion? And I know you're in a good spot right now, but if Kirby left and you got an opening, by year 3, if you're not competing for college football playoffs, are we pulling the plug and going to the next guy?
Well, I actually think that NIL changes this, right? There's so much pressure because not only are boosters giving money to the program, they're having to give more money so that players can get paid, and they expect that level of money that they're giving. They need to see some sort of compensation for what they're providing. So I do think that there's a lot more pressure on coaches now. I mean, we saw Jimbo Fisher get booted, and think about how much money they were paying him and how much they're still going to have to continue to pay him. And so obviously the level of success for a program is more important now. And I actually think that bringing Texas and Oklahoma into the SEC when there's no SEC East and SEC West, and with a 12-team playoff and there being more opportunity to make it to the postseason, I think the pressure on the coaches is higher than ever.
Last thing I got for you, Kaylee, can you give us your most embarrassing Rusty Mansell story? But the audience.
Okay, I've got one. I've got one. So I was a junior in high school, I believe, and I told you guys I was a big rule follower. I got in trouble one time, never got in trouble again. And it was prom or homecoming or something. I'm from a small town, went to a small high school. My principal and my dad were really tight, and so I'm getting ready. My dad pulls me in the living room, and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to give you some insider information. I don't want any of your friends to get in trouble." I was like, "Cool." And he goes, "They're going to breathalyze you guys when you walk through the door at prom. So, you know, you need to tell all your friends." So I'm in a big group message with a bunch of people that we're going with. And I was like, "Hey, guys, I just found this out. Don't want anybody to get in trouble. Giving you guys the heads up." And they're thanking me like I'm the hero and the savior of the night, right? So then we get to the event. We walk through the door. Nobody's doing a breathalyzer. This was something that my principal and my dad had come up with together so that everyone would be on their best behavior, and everybody's just looking at me like I'm an idiot. They had this whole scandal plan, and I was just like,
Dad.
Yeah,
nice.
You know, I went from being the hero and the savior to the villain of the night.
He told us the same damn thing our first SEC media days. Can you believe that? That's why we weren't drunk. Anything else, Shane?
No. Again, it was fantastic having you on. Could you tell the listeners where they can find you on social media?
I'm at Mansell Kaylee on Twitter, X. I don't know what the kids call it these days, but you can find me there. And I do want to just say thank you guys. It's been my absolute pleasure to sit down with y'all. Seeing just how you guys approach interviews is so different than what everybody else is doing out here. It makes it fun. It's not work. So thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.